Okay, King, we are live.
Thank you, Du, and good afternoon, committee. Oh, hold on one second. I was double dipping. I had the YouTube channel on at the same time. So good afternoon, committee. This is our second meeting. It is August 3rd. The committee meeting being for the Fallbrook Public Utility District and the Rainbow Municipal Water District reorganization proposals. I am going to now ask our commission clerk, Tammy Luckett, to go ahead and call roll of our 10 committee members. Tammy.
Yes. Tom Kennedy.
I'm here.
Jack Beebe.
I am here.
Sandy Crew.
I'm here.
Nick Canettis.
Here.
Lydia Romero. Is Lydia Romero on the line?
Here. I'm here.
Okay. Kimberly Thorner.
Present.
Gary Croucher.
Present.
David Sherishore.
Here.
Brian Albright. Is he on the call or the call dropped? Brian Albright.
There he is.
Here. But we'll continue.
Okay.
Yep, I'm
Rachel
here.
Cortez.
Here.
Solon's roll call.
And I think I heard Brian at the very end chiming in that confirming he's here. So it sounds like, Tammy, that we have all 10 committee members present.
Yes, all 10 are present.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to take the liberty to immediately go a little bit out of schedule in our agenda, but since I created the agenda, I think that's okay. And I just wanted to do an agenda review before we hit public comment. So the idea today, committee members, is for us to get a little more into the substantive issues that are before Lavco, but also then in a related notion, the advisory committee. Again, the advisory committee being tasked with helping Lavco staff in real time process and go through the administrative review of what are two rather unique proposals. And so to that end, the first half of the meeting, we're going to hear from Holly, Commission Counsel Holly Watley is going to give us kind of an insider primer, if you will, on issues relating to Lavco's role under CEQA, as well as the bones of Lavco's ability to condition proposals and the scale and scope of what we could theoretically do. And then after we hear from Holly, we're going to talk a little bit about consultants and the potential role of consultants going forward in this process. And at the end of this, not only are we going to talk about an agenda topics for our third meeting, but I do want to put in to the agenda verbally, before we adjourn, an opportunity for all of the committee members to kind of go around and provide any comments before we adjourn. So that's the game plan. And I forgot to mention, of course, we have some minutes for you to approve, as well as Robert's going to give an update, but just to set the stage of what's to come. So with that, having done call to order, we've done roll call, public comment. So this is the opportunity in which anyone from the general public can make comments to the committee on a topic germane, but not explicitly on the agenda. So that would mean the comment would need to be on the Fallbrook and Rainbow proposals or something related to these actions before Lavco and before this advisory committee. Let me check in with Tammy. Tammy, do we have anyone registered to speak during public comment?
Moderator, none for public comments, item number 3.
Very good. And let me check in with Erica. Erica, any emails received as we've gone along here wishing to provide comments to the advisory committee?
No comments received.
Very good. So that ends public comment. I will provide an opportunity at the very end. I'll check back in with Tammy and Erica to see if any comments are received during the course of the committee meeting. So that draws us down to business items. The first item, and this is a voting action item, committee members. Staff went ahead and prepared action minutes for your last meeting. They were attached. In fact, they're the only attachment provided to your agenda. I am looking for a motion to approve.
This is Kim Thorner. I move approval.
Thank you,
Second.
Kim. Do we have a second?
Second.
And who was that second?
Tom.
Tom. Motion by Kim to approve, a second by Tom Kennedy. Because we're going to follow the governor's order to a T here. Tammy, let's go ahead and do a quick roll call on this.
Rachel Cortez,
Tess here.
Brian Albright,
Aye.
David Sherishore,
Aye.
Gary Croucher,
Yes.
Kimberly Thorner,
Aye.
Lydia Romero,
Aye.
Nick Canetis,
Yes.
Sandy Curl,
Yes.
Jack Beebe,
Yes.
Tom Kennedy.
Aye.
We have 10 in favor, 0 opposed. The motion passes.
Thank you, committee members. So now we are on to item 4B, processing update on the reorganization proposals. Project manager and chief policy analyst Robert Berry, what say you?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Keen. Good afternoon, committee members. Just a short update. Nothing has really changed in terms of the status of the two proposals. The proposals will be continued to be considered incomplete as we move forward through the processing to the point of a certificate of filing being adopted. That is the formal document that states the application's submittals are complete, and that allows the commission then to schedule the hearing for or the proposal for a hearing. At this time, we are in the property tax negotiation period from the auditor's notice on June 29th. I have been in touch with the Department of Planning and Development Services with the county, which is the department that actually handles the property tax exchange negotiations on behalf of the Board of Supervisors through their board policy B45. Staff at the planning department is working with the auditor to determine the applicability of the master enterprise resolution, which applies to annexations, detachments between enterprise districts, and also the potential for navigating the County Water Authority Act in terms of any continued payments that would continue through the assessor's allocation. Complication is that once territory is detached from a district, it severs the ability of the assessor to continue to allocate funds to the detaching agency. So given the Water Authorities Act and the potential continued property tax revenues going to the Water Authority, if a detachment was to be approved, there would need to be some discussions in terms of how that payment would continue outside of the assessor's valuation. The way the property tax exchange would typically work is if there is a pre-existing allocation, it would be transferred to the successor agency following the annexation. In this case, we're aware that Eastern's not requesting a transfer of those funds. So there's some discussions that need to happen in terms of the applicability of the Water Authority Act and how that would be continued with the allocated property tax funds that are going to the Water Authority at this point and would continue if detachment was approved. So I'll have an update on that on our next meeting following additional discussions with the county. And I'd be happy to answer any questions on the process at this point. We're obviously going to be using the advisory committee for a lot of the details on the processing on any terms and conditions that would be adopted in association with the proposed jurisdictional changes. The property tax exchange is just a requirement through the revenue and tax code associated with all proposed jurisdictional changes. Again, that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Robert. So using, if we can, and this is throughout the agenda, if everyone's familiar with the raise hand feature in their Zoom browser, we can do that. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I see a question from committee member Gary Croucher. Gary.
No, I was just waving at you, making sure my hand worked, so I'm good.
It does, and I was artfully paying attention at the same time, so 2 for 2 on that. Seeing no other comments, and I'm going to assume on this item the public will not have a question, although now that I said that out loud, Erica, are there any email submittals for this item?
I have not received any, no.
Okay. And again, public, for those who are watching on YouTube, at the very end, we'll do a circle back in case we missed something along the way. So, Robert, thank you so much for the update on the proposal processing as it is today. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, 4C, and I'm going to ask Commission Counsel Holly Watley to take this item. Holly.
Thanks, Keen. If you could just pop the slides up. While doing that, I know that for most folks on the committee, you're well-versed in the basics of CEQA. Nevertheless, we thought it would be helpful for me to just touch on a very general level what we see as Lafco's role on the CEQA process for these 2 proposals. If you could go to slide 2. I think everybody has probably seen a slide like this or similar one from the back of the CEQA, not Lavco, CEQA guidelines that lays out sort of the flow of when a project comes in the door, what the public agencies need to do in order to comply with CEQA. So this is probably familiar to most folks, and it really highlights just at the outset what are the key questions, and these will be the key questions for these 2 proposals as well. Next slide. So the key questions, of course, are that were captured on that is it a project as defined in CEQA? And for purposes of this discussion, obviously, we're just going to assume it is a project. And if it is a project, is it exempt? And even if it is exempt, does an exception to the exemption apply? Because lawyers drafted this, there had to be exceptions to exemptions. And then, of course, if it's not exempt and there's no exception or an exception to the exemption applies, pardon me, what type of environmental document is required? Does it require a neg deck? Does it require a full-blown environmental impact review? Those are the big, broadest questions that that staff is dealing with as it processes these proposals. Next slide. Now, at our last meeting, there was discussion of the Class 20 exemption, which is one of the exemptions that may apply. But to be clear, we've not made a final determination on this. And this is one that I've put the text of it up here so you can see it applies to changes in organization of agencies where the changes do not change the geographical area in which previously existing powers are exercised. And I think as most folks on the committee know, there have been differences of opinion among the applicants and the Water Authority on whether either of the proposals qualify even under the Class 20 exemption on its face. But this is one, you know, we've got to acknowledge that this is one of the things that staff is working through and analyzing. But of course, even if there's a determination that the exemption applies, it's quite possible perhaps there is an exception to the exemption. Next slide. So while there are different types of exceptions, I've just highlighted two here that may or may not apply. And the first is when cumulative impacts of successive projects of the same type in the same place over time are significant, then that can be considered an exception that would take the proposal out of a Class 20 exemption. Another one potentially could be if there's a reasonable possibility that the activity will have a significant effect on the environment due to unusual circumstances. It's just called the unusual circumstances exception for short. And again, whether either of these exceptions would apply is a very fact-specific analysis. And to be clear, whether the analysis is the same for both proposals is too soon for us to tell. But I just wanted to highlight these to let you know that this is what staff is going through, and these are items that staff is considering. Next slide. So if the project is not exempt or an exception to the exemption applies, Lavco would be the lead agency because it is the one making the discretionary decision on whether to approve the detachments. At that point, it would conduct an initial study, and then based on the results of that initial study, it would have the appropriate environmental document prepared. Again, very fact specific, and whether it would be a neg deck, a mitigated neg deck, or an EIR, we don't know. And whatever the document is, we would go through the necessary public notice and comment period appropriate to the document. So that if this is the path that we go down, there will be ample time for public input and the affected parties to provide input. Next slide. So as I've indicated, we've not completed our CEQA analysis. We have obviously gotten letters from the subject agencies and affected local agencies regarding their CEQA positions. So we've got correspondence both from the applicants and also from the Water Authority. We have posted those to the committee's website. I believe we recently got some late last week. I'm not sure if those quite have made it to the committee website, but it will be our practice going forward to make sure that the committee has access to all those. And the information in those materials does help, and it is going to help us complete and perform the CEQA analysis, which again right now is not completed yet. So this one, this presentation is pretty straightforward. I don't know if there are any questions from the committee or, but I'm happy to entertain them.
This is Gary. I've got my hand up, and whenever.
Yeah, I apologize. I was a little late in getting to that. So we have a couple of hands up. Gary and then Tom.
Okay, thank you, Holly, and thank you very much for the clarification today and where we sit with the CEQA process. It helps clear it up from, I think, a little confusion on the last meeting. So I love the fact that it absolutely shows that it's an independent analysis and no decision's been made as of yet. The one question I have is specific to the actions that were taken back in 2014 by Lafco and the applicants' positions at that time. Are we able to look at the input that was provided at that time from the different agencies as far as what they felt was appropriate for CEQA or not at that point as well?
I think on the CEQA record here, I mean, we're going to be looking at everything that's provided to us now. I mean, nothing prevents us from looking back at those materials, but whether they are relevant or applicable to the current state of affairs, we can't tell you right now.
Yeah, I think.
Well, I see Robert may have a.
And And I guess just as long as we share that with the committee members, the positions of the agencies previously within the same circumstances are a little bit different. But if we could supply those and you have a chance to look at those, that would be helpful.
Robert, did you have?
Well, I was just going to say, just for the benefit of the committee's knowledge, the 2014 proposal that Mr. Croucher is referencing was a proposal to, for lack of a better term, consolidate Rainbow and Fallbrook into one agency. That was ultimately not successful. It went to the commission and the commission denied the application. So the information that was gathered during that point was really specifically in relation to that proposal, which would have been a merger or a consolidation between the two agencies. It didn't affect the County Water Authority in a direct sense in the way that this proposal or these proposals do. They were not an affected agency directly as the two agencies were. So it's not directly applicable, but all of that proposal and the commission's determinations are public record and available.
Yeah, and I think if we could have those supplied to the committee members, that would be helpful to be able to look at the positions. It has some of the same areas as far as the same geographical areas and some of the same things that are being associated here, yet it doesn't show the difference that the water supply is a little bit different as far as Bay Delta versus Colorado River. But I think it's good to see what the agency's positions were at the time and what their beliefs were and how they may or may not have changed within it because it being the same geographical areas. So I think it's well worthwhile. And I think one of the Lavco commissioners had asked why something so drastic now. And I think that's a perfect thing to be able to look at what has occurred just 5 years ago and to be able to apply it to now. And that way we have those answers from this committee back to the full commission. So when they do ask something as specific as why something so drastic, we can show that there was some other alternatives that may even be explored at this point in time.
Thank you, Gary. Before we go to Tom, I wanted to just jump in, and Jack, I see your real hand is up. Just to be clear, though, Lafco staff is less interested in what outside agencies thought 5 years ago, as opposed to what we thought 5 years ago, and more to the point what we think today. And so we'll certainly share whatever information what is in the record. But to be blunt, what Rainbow and Fallbrook may have articulated in a separate, different proposal 5 years ago is less relevant to Lafco staff today than what is in the record, what's before us now, and what Lafco staff's analysis was 5 years ago. So just for the benefit.
No, I appreciate that, and I think it's helpful, and I think it's important that it's not outside agencies, it's actually inside agencies. And it's good to look at the history, just like the service reviews do. The service reviews don't look at a specific years, they look at multiple years. And I think that that's what we're doing. And like I said, with the entire, or the Lavco committee as a whole, they asking about what else is there that isn't so drastic. And maybe that's some things that we can work on internally with Rainbow and Fallbrook. But I think it's important for the committee to be able to see the big picture.
Very good. And so next in line, we'll go to Tom Kennedy, followed by Jack Beebe, and then Brian Albright. So Tom, Jack, Brian are in the queue. Mr. Kennedy.
Thanks, Keen. Yeah, and Gary, if you want to have any discussions about what happened in the 2014 time period, I'd be happy to fill you in. I was deep in the middle of all that as well. So the question I had relative to the Class 20 exemption, and I know that in some of the communications from the Water Authority, it described this as being unprecedented. But as I recall, from the mid-2000s, I recall another similar wholesale water supplier reorganization done in San Diego County, I believe, with Padre Dam and Lakeside Water. And as I looked through those records on that the Class 20 exemption applied there. And so I don't know whether Robert or Holly could comment on how that process worked then as Class 20, but it wouldn't be Class 20 today.
Well, first, I want to make clear and reiterate, which I said a few times throughout, staff hasn't made a decision, so I'm not, to say that I think you're asking us to make a comment on a decision that has yet to be made. So to say that, well, class 20 applied there and we're not applying it here, we've not made a decision either way on whether it applies. And I would, I think until we have a decision, that I'm not sure how helpful that is, but.
Very good. Let us go to Jack and then Brian.
Thank you, Keen. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how our consolidation applications are really relevant to today. So, it seems like Gary's kind of beating around the bush on something, and I think if they have something directly that they think's applicable, then I think they can provide that to the committee. I think we're all aware that 6 years ago, Rainbow had some challenges. Quite honestly, Tom's done a good job of resolving all those things. So a lot of what makes sense is to look at Fallbrook and Rainbow today, not where we were 6 years ago. So I'm trying to keep us focused. Obviously, again, all the time we spend on this, we pay for, and it just seems like we're trying to pull random things in here just to complicate the process. So I'm just hopeful we can keep this focused on relevant issues.
Thank you, Jack. Brian.
Thank you, Keen. And thank you, Holly. I appreciated the presentation. It definitely provided some context and clarity for me. And definitely was a topic that was discussed somewhat at length in some of the correspondence that was sent to us that we reviewed. I guess my question is just a clarification for the role of the advisory committee with respect to this issue. I don't think it's expected for the advisory committee to weigh in on specifically the issue of CEQA, whether its exempt or exception applies, but really just information only in context for us as we look at the broader issue. But if I am not understanding that correctly, I would like maybe some further input from you.
No, that is the case. We wanted to provide this update just to explain our process, and it is true that we're not looking to the committee to provide necessarily any input or guidance on the CEQA. We do welcome and have received, of course, substantive comments from both the districts and the County Water Authority, and certainly once we do have a CEQA decision, there may be more input that comes in. But you're absolutely right. But we did want to provide that context because there has been a lot of discussion of CEQA, and we just wanted the committee to know where we are on that.
David, I see your hand. I do want to make one follow up to Brian's question, and that is no, directly we're not going to be asking this committee to weigh in on the CEQA determination. That's going to be for staff. Robert, project manager, and Holly will be the principal drivers of making a good conclusion for us to present to the commission. But that said, keep in mind the issues that are related to whether an exemption is appropriate, i.e. are there exceptions, are there unique issues that we generate in the review of water reliability and all the factors that go into a standard proposal under Lavco law. If those issues that we do vet with the committee give rise to reconsider whether or not an exemption is appropriate. And it's important to note the applicants have forwarded the baseline right now, which is they have said, we believe that class 20 is appropriate. So now Lafco is reviewing that in the record. So it's, the advisory committee has this unique role. We're not asking you to make a recommendation or determination, but we are going to use you as a sounding board and ultimately to help inform us in making a decision. So there is some gray there. And David, I did see your hand up, sir, so go ahead.
Thank you, Keen. I appreciate those comments. I think that it is important that no preliminary decisions are made with regard to CEQA, because there are many nuances within the CEQA code. Until all materials from all interested parties have been received on September 18th.
Thank you, David. Gary, your hand is still up in the virtual world. Do you have another comment?
Yeah, no, it went down for a while, went back up after Jack threw out some info there. Mine isn't meant to confuse matters more. I don't think any one of us should be offended or feel we can't ask a question or can't ask for information. I think it's important for us to know the big picture. In my personal opinion, I think some of the application process has been oversimplified, saying how simple this process is. And I think the reason it came to the committee is it is actually very complex, and that I encourage others to ask questions, or if there's information that's available, that information be provided. So by no means am I trying to cloud the waters at all. Mine is simply I want to make sure that everybody's aware of information as it's deemed appropriate.
Thank you, Gary. So I'm looking at our virtual check-in. I see no other hands, but I do want, oh, hold on. I see Kim Thorner waving her hand fanatically at us. Go ahead, Kim.
I keep trying to hit the raise the hand and all it lets me do is clap. So I apologize for that. I need to get more technically advantage there. I did have a question for Holly on the class 20 exemption, and I wrote down your slide, and I think it says that it qualifies potentially when there's no change in the geographical area which previously existing powers were exercised. Is that applicable to the remainder agency, not just the agencies that are leaving? So I would assume that Fallbrook-Rainbow would say, hey, we're still exercising powers within the same geographical area. But then if I were the County Water Authority, I would offer that my powers, my geographical area that I previously exercised powers was dramatically changed. Do you look at just the agencies that are proposing the change, or do you look at the remainder agency in the CEQA determination as well?
Well, that's actually, one of the issues we're evaluating internally about the applicability of it is the scope of that. So I don't really have an answer right now. So that's one of the considerations.
Okay, and
one of the
that
things
was
to tease out. Yeah.
Okay, that's a question you're looking at. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Very good. And so not seeing any other questions from the committee itself. Oh, before I should have checked in with Sandy. My apologies, Sandy. Go ahead.
Just a clarification on the comment that David Sherishore made, and there was no response to that. I just want clarification that there isn't going to be some assessment until all of the documents have been submitted. And as you said, Keen, the basis for even looking at it right now is based on the two applications, and there'll be a lot more information coming in by the 18th. So it seems to me that a decision one way or the other can't be made until that has occurred. Can I have confirmation on that?
The confirmation provided, and I'll go a step further. So the application, as Robert started off his report on, they're incomplete. Both applications are considered incomplete. So not only do we have the CEQA issue, we have other slew of issues that are going on. I think it'd be fair to say we'll be way past September 18th before we make a CEQA determination, and it will only be when we're ready to issue a certificate of filing. So there will be time, certainly after September 18th. And going back to my kind of soundboard comment with the advisory committee, the commission said it is interested in getting input from all of you before we make seminal determinations. So I have no doubt before we make a determination at the staff level, we will share our thinking with this committee. And so there will be opportunities for more discussion.
Thank you.
Very good. So I'm now pretty confident that there are no more hands up in the air. Seeing that, Tammy, were there anyone from the public who's registered to speak on this item?
None were registered.
Okay,
No.
Erica, any email comments received along the way?
No email comments received.
Very good. Okay, so with that, we're going to transition to the next item that Holly will also be proceeding over. Item 4D in your agenda packet, Lafco powers to condition approvals. Holly.
Thanks. If you could pop those slides up, I'd appreciate it. This is going to be very similar to the general overview I just gave on CEQA, and but the focus on this one is on Lafco's general authority to impose terms and conditions on reorganization approvals. So for folks that are familiar with Lavco, you'll be this is not news to you, but for folks that don't deal much with Lavco, this is very similar in concept, of course, to conditions of approval that can be put on, by planning commissions for planning projects, etc. Next slide. So essentially, Cortazinox Herzberg Act expressly authorizes Lavco to impose terms and conditions when it approves reorganization proposals. And this list I've given here is not intended to be exhaustive, but these are generally the 3 sections where you find Lavco's conditioning authority, and there may be others, but these are the primary sections. And in fact, the primary one is section 56886. Next slide. There is one general and overarching limitation on those conditions, and that the Act expressly provides that the terms and conditions cannot directly regulate land use, property development, or subdivision requirements. The land use planning is left to those agencies that have authority within their jurisdiction over whatever the project is for land use. So that's the general limitation on the conditioning authority. And other than that, the authority is fairly broad. Next slide. So the types of conditions that Lavco can impose is actually a pretty long list. So I'm only just going to touch on some of the examples within certain categories. So the first one here is Lavco has the authority to term and condition approvals on financial terms. It can require the payment of money for the transfer of real property, personal property, etc. It can impose or exempt liability for bonded debt or other contracts. It can impose a financial condition related to the acquisition or transfer of any real property. And whether any one of these or other financial conditions are applicable, of course, just as with CEQA, it is very case specific on what is appropriate given the type of proposal and the types of services at issue. Next slide. The other types of terms and conditions that the Lavco can impose are ones related to governance. So this usually applies more in a situation where there is a dissolution of an existing agency or establishment of a new one, and along with that, establishing or dissolving the legislative body. So there can be terms attached for governance related to that piece. Next slide. And the Act actually, just as sort of an example of the breadth of that conditioning authority, it even provides this catch-all authority in subdivision V of that section about allowing any other matters necessary or incidental to any of the terms and conditions specified elsewhere in that section. So it kind of has a catch-all to avoid a situation where Lafco is approving something, and just to ensure that that the conditions of that approval can cover all the pieces it needs to ensure that a complete and rational reorganization takes place. Next slide. There's also a specific subdivision in that same section that talks about principal acts. Well, there's principal acts are referenced in a few of the sections, but there's one that talks about it generally, and that it says that Lafco may impose a condition, a term and condition authorized or required by the principal act with respect to any change of organization. Next slide. So that was generally Lafco's conditioning authority. There's a bit of an interesting wrinkle in these proposals that is not often present, and that is this issue of non-district status. So the Act allows certain types of districts to request that Lafco deem them not to be a district for a proposal if the district meets certain requirements. The Water Authority was one of the types of districts that's allowed to seek this type of determination, and in fact, they did so here. Importantly, what they did is they asked to be deemed not a district with respect to Part 4, but they did not ask to be not a district with respect to Part 5. I know there's a couple of double negatives in there, but in any case, Part 4, which, and to be clear, Lafco did grant that request because the factors were present. So for purposes of Part 4 of the Act, the authority is not a district. And what that means is that any post-approval procedures are not governed by Cortazinox, they're governed by the Principal Act. So if Cortazinox applied, then there would be a protest hearing, and only if there was sufficient protest would an election be triggered. In this case, however, because the Principal Act applies, it's going to be the election requirements of the Principal Act that govern. There will not be a protest hearing as there would be otherwise. So Lafco cannot condition it as they normally would anything else on completion of a protest hearing procedure. Now, Part 5 is the part of the Act that talks about terms and conditions if Lafco doesn't apply its own terms and conditions under the sections I just talked about. And the authority did not request to be deemed not a district under that part. So those provisions of that part still apply to the extent they're applicable generally. Next slide. Well, I got ahead of myself and I explained this slide already. So, but the upshot being that Lafco retains authority to impose terms and conditions consistent with the Act, and but in terms of any post-approval election process, if either proposal is approved, there will not be a protest hearing, but there will be voter approval required in the detaching district per the Principal Act for the authority. Next slide. And just to let you know, Lafco, these are two separate proposals, and Lafco, even though they're being processed simultaneously, is treating them as separate. And so it's conceivable that there will be different conditions on each proposal. So we're not required, Lafco's not required to have identical conditions. If you know, one condition doesn't make sense for one proposal, you know, Lafco will consider that. So we don't have to have matching conditions. Maybe they will match, maybe they won't, but it's not a requirement. Next slide. So what are some likely conditions of approval if one or more of the applications are approved? Well, it's going to be subject to voter approval per the Water Authorities Principal Act. And there will be an effective date. There will be a condition of approval that sets an effective date for the detachment, assuming the voters approve it. Next slide. Now, those were likely conditions of approval, meaning like if it's approved, you can almost guarantee those are going to be part of it. And then there's some potential conditions of approval. We do not know. We do not have enough information to know now, but as you heard the discussion of the property tax exchange agreement, it's just obvious that there is going to be a financial analysis that goes on here. And as part of that, that may inform whether there is a one-time or some type of ongoing payments by the districts to the authority. Depending on that financial analysis, that there hasn't been a formal fiscal analysis that's begun yet, and the property tax exchange discussions that are ongoing. And those, of course, the outcome of those will really kind of directly inform what type of financial conditions may be imposed here, whether it's done simply via property tax or whether because of the issues that Robert talked about with limitation on the assessor's power, that it needs to be handled in a manner outside of the property taxes. We have received a letter on behalf of Rainbow that talks about their position on the limits on Lavco's authority to impose financial conditions, and I believe we just got that on Friday, so that's going to be part. That's going to help inform our analysis of the scope of conditions that we can consider, and we have not yet received, and I'm sure we will, any comments from the authority on that letter or on the scope of Lafco's conditioning authority. In fact, I don't think I saw. You can go away from the slides now, thanks. I don't think that I saw Mark Haddam on the call, but Sandy, I'm sure he would. He's aware of that letter, and I would just invite. I find it very helpful, and I would invite any response the authority has to, or a position they have on the scope of Lavco's conditioning authority generally. I would invite him to weigh in on that, and but I'm now open for any questions on that. Again, this is just a general layout of our authority as we see it, and there have not been any decisions made about what condition to impose.
Thank you, Holly. So again, members, if you are acclimated to using your raise hand feature, by all means, you're welcome to do that now. If you have a question to Holly on terms and conditions, both holistically and perhaps even, the thought process that may go into these proposals. I don't see any hands raised up on the screen. Up, Rachel Cortez, your hand caught my attention. Please go ahead.
Just figured out how to do it, so that's great. I guess that my question is about it going to the voters. So regardless of the decision that's made by Lavco, it still has to go to the voters to be approved or not approved, or am I misunderstanding that concept?
No, you're understanding it. If in the absence of this kind of curious non-district status, when if Lavco approved a detachment, for example, there would be a protest proceeding, and only if a sufficient protest came in could it force an election. In this case, however, there's not going to be any protest proceeding, and the Authorities Principal Act does provide for an election in the detaching territory.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Holly. Any other questions from the advisory committee on the topic of conditioning. Seeing none here. Tammy, were there any registered speakers for this item?
No registered speakers.
No registered speakers. Erica, any emails received along the way?
No email comments received.
Very good. So I will just make kind of a concluding remark, and I do appreciate Holly's presentation. And going back to one of those that screenshot or that comment in the statute that says something to the effect that, you know, anything else that the commission deems appropriate in, you know, effectuating a jurisdictional change. I have to say, as you know, as staff, as executive officer, and unless council tells me otherwise, I have a pretty liberal view of what Lavco can and cannot condition. So as we go forward, it would be fair to telegraph to all of you that if issues come up, our orientation at staff is to figure out how to come up with a term and condition. We did that quite effectively, I believe, with the Julian reorganization proposal. And just because there's nowhere in the statute that says, Lafco, you can condition on X, just because it doesn't say that, as long as we stay true to not affecting land use, property rights, or whatever the actual terminology that Holly mentioned, that is the clear prohibition, we try to be troubleshooters. And so the conditioning ability of Lafcos is important in that respect. And I would imagine that in the next few meetings of this committee, we will discuss some potential condition issues as questions come up to get your feedback. So with that, I have two mouses here. With that comment being said, let us go on to the next agenda item, and that's actually for me. And that is to talk about item 4E. 4E is what are some potential issues and items for feedback from the committee on the use of consultants. And so there's really three questions that I have for the committee. And I'll state them up front, and then I'll go in a little more detail on each one in a second. But the first question is topics that we reasonably know now that it's a worthwhile investment for Lavco, and i.e. the applicants who are going to cover those costs to address in terms of bringing in special expertise. So that's the first topic that I'm going to talk or address with the committee. The second is how to go about the selection of those consultants. I have my leanings. I want to share those with the committee and get some feedback. And then third, the tasking of the consultants themselves, consultant or consultants. I have my leanings. I'd be curious to hear from the committee as to your approach. So those are the three issues that should be on your mind as I go through this item. And I am going to certainly check in at the end for questions and certainly get some feedback. But on the topics of consultants themselves, or the topics we'd want consultants to engage in, I am confident, almost absolute, that I believe we need to bring in some expertise on three particular topics. And we discussed this briefly at the end of our last meeting, but the work and the thinking that has gone on since has reaffirmed this. That is, we need at Lavco to bring in an independent consultant to address the topic of water reliability. In particular, we are listening and aware of some points that the Water Authority has made that we need to really look at if there are substantive differences between the secure or the reliability of the water supplies that are under the baseline scenario, that we do nothing, that Fallbrook-Rainbow stay with the Water Authority, versus the proposed alternative, which is to detach from the Water Authority and for these agencies to join Eastern Municipal Water District. Specifically, we want an expert to come in and tell us is there a substantive difference for our purposes at Lavco with respect to that water supply between the two sites? The second issue is certainly related, and that is what are the impacts, not only for Fallbrook and Rainbow on rates, but then conversely, what are the impacts for the other 22 member agencies of the Water Authority? I think it's clear that this in the next item will be driving issues in terms of potential conditions that Holly just spoke about. It is clear that an outside expert would be of great use to Lafco's staff in agnostically looking at that discussion point. And I have no doubts we'll kind of talk about this in a different angle in our next item as well when we talk about feedback from other Water Authority members. Third and finally, the issue of tasking consultants. Oh, excuse me, I jumped ahead. The third item on the topics is this idea of truing up, right? Now, should Fallbrook and or Rainbow leave the Water Authority, there's likely some movement on the asset and liability ledger of things. We are not presupposing at Lavco that should Fallbrook and Rainbow leave, that they should owe some kind of restitution to the Water Authority in its 22 member agencies. But we're also not presupposing that that's not the case, that at the end, there needs to be some restitution. What we are presupposing is we're not exactly equipped at Lavco to make that call, given the dynamics and complexities of how these water cost and obligations that are in the books now and going forward need to be assessed. So those are the three specific topics I, as the Lavco executive officer, in consultation with Robert and Holly, believe we need to bring in some outside experts on. The question for the committee is, are there other topics right now? I can proactively say, I don't think right now we need to bring in an expert on CEQA because we haven't finished our work on CEQA to begin with. I think we're well calibrated at staff to at least go a little further in our analysis and perhaps carry the analysis all the way to the commission. At least that's right now my thinking. So I don't think we need to bring in a CEQA expert, at least not right now. Are there any other topics that this committee at this early stage would say to us, hey, you need to expand your focus and consider this? And so this is a form of a question, and I will look at the raise hand feature. Your silence I will interpret as consent. So please be aware of that. And thank you, Kim, for your engagement on that. So let's get the right, I see two hands so far. So in opposite order of last time, Tom Kennedy and then Gary Croucher.
Thanks, Kane. I think those topics are fine. I think that one of the things, as you've indicated before, is that the cost for all these consultants lands on the applicant. So we do want to minimize that to the extent we can. There's a lot of information regarding the water supply reliability in our application, the study that was done. We've had multiple studies done. And so if someone's going to come on, I think it'd be great if we start at a baseline and say, and maybe the Water Authority can give us some feedback on it. And I know I've given them drafts of earlier analyses that we did as long ago as a year ago. And so if there's some concerns with how the analysis was done, we can help steer the consultant. There's a lot of water supply reliability experts within the Water Authority and within Eastern and Metropolitan and things like that. So the other part is that when you go to get a consultant, we need to find people who are versed in Southern California water because there are a lot of moving parts, and that if you're from out of the region, you could spend months just getting up to speed on where the bathrooms are, so to speak. And so it'd be helpful. I'm not sure who's on your short list, but find somebody who's got some relevant, somewhat local Southern California experience.
And Tom, I think the next two questions I have after we cover topics is going to dive a little into some of your latter items of the selection criteria and the tasking. So that said, Gary.
Yes, perfect. I appreciate it. And I think one thing in particular with the consultants that may be needed would be that they're independent and that they don't have a conflict of interest, that they can truly look at it from an outside view that isn't impacted by an agency that they're either employed by or they're being contracted by. That'll be tough because we reach out to so many, but I guess in a perfect world, if we could get somebody that was completely independent, that was able to look at this objectively, that would be helpful. The other one was just in overall committee assignment. One of the commissioners at one point had made the comment about he'd like to see us get this worked out between the agencies as opposed to the Lavco commission making a decision that neither one of the three agencies or 24 agencies within the county would like. So is this committee looking at any of that, or is that completely off our radar? And that's simply a comment that was made by a commissioner.
Well, Gary, to your latter comment, this is the avenue and the vehicle for that those agreements and harmonizing to happen. As staff goes through what essentially is sunlighting what would have been our internal administrative review, and you're seeing in real time the things that go through our mind, from Robert talking about property tax exchange to me talking about what consultant topics we need. You're seeing in real time, and in doing so, you have the opportunity right now to tell your counterparts, Rainbow, Fallbrook, and Eastern, if you want to have side discussions on these, knowing that it's on the committee's radar. Not only do I encourage it, I hope it happens. One way or the other, Lafco staff is bringing this to the commission. Ideally, as Commissioner Desmond, and that's I think who you're referencing, said, we'd come with some agreement. Not, I think realistically, are we going to find holistic agreement on everything for the subject agencies? Probably not. But if we can at least whittle down the disputes by the time it gets to the dais, I think the better we will all be. So I would encourage you to take up this platform as an opportunity, and I say this to Tom, Nick, and Jack too. If there's opportunities for you to work outside of the explicitness of this committee to remedy some of these issues, by all means. So that comment said, I don't see other hands up right now. Oh, David, go ahead.
Thank you, Kane. With regard to particular expertise in Southern California that Tom Kennedy mentioned, I agree with that in part, but we need to remember that our water comes from outside of, for the most part, outside of our region, except for that which we produce in our region ourselves, such as desal and the pure water project that's proposed by the city. So if you're talking about Colorado River water, you're talking regional in terms of a national basis. Practically, you've got the lower Colorado River Basin, you've got the upper Colorado River Basin. If it's coming through the state water project, it's coming through the Delta region around Sacramento, which is a particularly environmentally sensitive region, and all water agencies have been tasked with reducing supplies coming from the Delta. So the people that we should be talking to or considering need to have not only Southern California expertise, but overarching expertise with California and Colorado River Basin supplies as well. Thank you.
Well said. I see Jack has a hand up.
Oh, sorry, it took me a minute. I figured out how to raise my hand. I'm proud of myself. So I think we're all in agreement that someone independent is important. Obviously, I think that's going to be a key consideration. The other thing is Tom mentioned, and I'll keep repeating, is I don't want him to waste a lot of time. So we've put a lot of effort into the water supply reliability analysis. The Water Authority, is apparently working on something to provide a response in September. It seems like the parties that know this the best are quite honestly going to be the experts of the different water districts, be it Water Authority, Eastern, Metropolitan. So to me, it would make sense for all those parties to put together, their case, and then have the consultant come in and look at it. And I think you could make the same case on the financial side where, we put some information together. It would be great if, the Water Authority responded. And at the same point, what Mr. Croucher brought up, at least from Fallbrook perspective, we continue to be open to having discussions. So this isn't the greatest format. If we think we're going to develop some sort of, resolution, 20 people on a Zoom call probably isn't going to get us there. So, we're still open to that, but I don't think waiting till September and getting those comments is necessarily going to help get us there. So that's something we're still willing to do, and I'll reiterate that.
Thank you, Jack. I see a hand from Sandy and then Nick.
And my hand's still up too, Gary's.
Okay. Sandy, Nick, and then Gary. Go ahead, Sandy.
I think that, a follow-on to David's comment with regard to the level of expertise that's needed on water in California really also points to the issue that we need an environmental consultant early on, because that's part of the issue from our perspective of whether or not environmental review needs to be done at a high level. And I think absent that information and analysis from somebody with that experience is going to be somewhat problematic in coming to a decision on what is the appropriate course of action on the environmental review.
Nick and then Gary.
This is Nick. With regards to the water supply and system reliability, obviously we recognize that this was going to be an important question to Lavco and all the parties involved, and particularly important to Eastern. We want to make sure in our ability to support Fallbrook-Rainbow's application that we were confident in Eastern's ability to provide the water supply that was necessary to those two districts. And so I think, as all the committee members are aware, I mean, we put a lot of effort in and prepared an analysis and a technical memorandum that describes Eastern's ability to, what we've determined to be 100% reliable in supplying the wholesale water service that those two agencies need. So I would definitely support bringing on a third-party consultant. I would suggest that they start with the analysis, the technical memorandum that we've produced. As far as finding a totally independent, impartial consultant that has not worked for all the agencies or has any perceived bias might be challenging. But regardless, you bring on a qualified consultant from Eastern's perspective. We don't really care who that is. Look at the work that we've done, the analysis that we've done. We're very confident that it's very thorough, and if there's any concerns or questions, we're definitely prepared and will be available to address those questions and issues.
Very good. Thank you, Nick. Gary.
Yeah, and mine, just with Jack, I really do appreciate his words. I am full agreement with him that I don't think that we'll work on some of the issues with a 20 group person Zoom, that I will be reaching out to Jack personally, and we'll be setting something up with the support of the officers and the staff at the Water Authority.
So I think on this one topic, there is agreement with understanding from Sandy that there's a bit of a qualification about also wanting to see an expert on the environmental side, on a CEQA expert, but agreement that water reliability impacts on water rates, and then any potential financial true-ups should be the focus of the consultants. Again, Sandy, I hear what you're saying. At this point, I believe Lafco staff is in a good position to assess the class 20, and in particular, as Holly mentioned, whether or not an exception to the exemption is appropriate. But that does not preclude us from, as we learn more about the water reliability, to revisit that, given whatever the consultant independently tells us are substantive issues. This brings us to the issue of tasking and selecting the consultants. And let me just tell you what my leaning is on both. In committee, I'm looking for your feedback. On the selection of the consultants, with the help of our council, I've been in contact with a handful of consultants already, with a particular emphasis on consultants who are based outside of the region, which I appreciate goes counter to what Tom said, although they are familiar certainly with some of the systems. But the consultants that we have talked to date are Bay Area based. Partly, I think, and I don't know if this was David's thinking. I think David was talking more about the holistic water system that goes beyond a physical geographic boundary. But to have someone who's less familiar with everyone here can look at these things perhaps from a more unique and fresh perspective. My lean is to, and this applies if this was in just about every case, so to continue what would be practiced by staff, is for me to identify and pass along those 3 or 4 consultant names to the applicants and say, these are the applicants that I've talked to that I believe can do a good job on these 3 topics. Talk to them, discuss the financial cost of doing that. Lavco staff will decide what the scope of work is, but to allow the applicants to choose who of the 3 or 4 vetted consultants who they want to hire. That's my lean. Now, does that create a potential that the Water Authority or one of the other 22 member agencies may find one or of those consultants disagreeable? Perhaps. And so I guess I'm talking out loud here. I don't know necessarily how to remedy that possibility. We could certainly, offer up, the opportunity for the Water Authority to also get the names of the consultants that Lafco staff has vetted, and to have, kind of a, you can pick one jury to knock out of the pool or something like that. So I'm open to any suggestions there, but I'm also very sensitive to our applicants and having the normal ability through Lafco staff to work with consultants that monetarily are more agreeable to their budget. So that's my lean, to give 3 or 4 names to the 2 applicants, for them to talk to the consultants, and then to engage those consultants going forward in serving as our outside consultants. The other part is the tasking. It sounds like we've got some consensus on the committee to task the committee or the consultants on first and foremost doing almost a peer review of what's been produced to date by the subject agencies. Allow the outside consultant to read the technical memorandum from Eastern, read the submittals from Fallbrook-Rainbow, and then presumably another submittal from the Water Authority, and for then that consultant to make an independent assessment to Lafco staff as to the adequacy of those documents. And perhaps at that point, if the consultant says all is well, all the assumptions are reasonable, the conclusions are sound, well, then we don't have to do any more work. If, however, the consultant then says there are some blind spots and or some assumptions I don't agree with in these existing documents, well, then we task the consultants to proceed with doing their independent work, a version of an addendum, if you will. That's my lean. So on those topics, and I would be particularly interested in hearing from not only the subject agencies, but our 6 other advisory committee members as kind of the independent eyes, if you will, on the committee on this topic. So with that in order, I'm going to go Sandy, Tom, Gary, Jack. Sandy, Tom, Gary, Jack. Sandy, please go ahead.
I would just point out, Keen, that the Water Authority is a subject agency as well, and we need to reach consensus on the consultant, as you've heard today and heard through the correspondence over the last, whatever period of time. There are clearly some disagreements, and I think it would be patently inappropriate to have the consultants only selected by the two applicants.
Understood. And the distinction I'm making is applicant versus subject agencies, right? So there is a distinction here. My comment is to defer to the applicants to pick out of a pool of Lafco vetted consultants. But I think we're going to have more discussion on this, Sandy. So hold that thought.
Just a clarification, though, I think you just made the point that I was making. I think, and that's my disagreement.
I'm not sure exactly what I said to go that route, but I'm going to have to revisit that while Tom starts talking.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that the applicants who are paying for the consultants should have some sort of measure in the selection of them. But I also understand that the other parties may think that there's something untoward about that. So if for whatever reason consensus can't be drawn, perhaps you do it like some people do with arbitrators or things like that, or mediators, to where here's a pool of 4 and we'll pick ones we don't want until you're left with 1. And I think that, like Nick said, we're extremely confident that the information we presented will be supported by anybody who looks at it. I just, like Jack said, we don't want to have to bring somebody in from so far out that they're going to spend 6 months getting up to speed, because we want to keep this process moving along expeditiously, because we want to get to the election as soon as we can.
Gary and then Jack.
No, and I just appreciate Tom's comments. I think in order for all of us to agree that they're independent is going to be the process that Tom just described, as far as being able to whittle them down, and then ultimately Lavco picks somebody that they're comfortable with, that either side either didn't object to or had the least objection with. I'm in agreement with that. That way it's not just going to the members, agencies that are paying for it and is being done for it. Thus the expert gives them exactly what they want on a silver platter. It's meant to be an independent. So I do appreciate Tom's willingness to acknowledge that, and that would be helpful. I think everybody come the end of the process saying that it was a good, fair, transparent process.
Very good. Jack and then Nick.
Yes, sorry, I just learned how to lower my hand, so I didn't actually have anything to say.
Thank you, Jack. Nick. Nick, are you still with us? I scared him off. Okay, well.
No, sorry, I raised and lowered my hand, but I forgot to unmute myself. But I think I'm here now. Without being redundant to what I said earlier, again, Eastern is comfortable with whatever qualified consultant is brought on board to look at this matter. And ultimately, I think my question is being answered is Eastern 100% reliable in providing the water supply that's necessary for Fallbrook-Rainbow? Can you hear me?
In a George Orwellian way, yes. And I think the comment you were making was something to the effect about getting your technical memorandum in front of the consultant.
Yeah, sorry, I saw you leaning in a little bit, so I got the impression that you weren't able to hear me very well. I'm coming a little bit closer to my mic, hopefully here. Without being redundant to the comments I made earlier, I just wanted to say that ultimately the question that needs to be answered. Sorry, can you hear me still?
No, we can hear you. There's just a feedback going on, so it's a bit disrupted with some distortion. But I think if my summarizing comment works earlier about wanting to make sure that your technical memorandum is part of the review of the consultant, and that the consultant, it sounds like there's consensus, and far be it from me to be the one who stops the agencies from finding agreement. So if the agencies, subject agencies are all saying you want some type of buy-in from all, you know, Tom you made a reference to some kind of process that I'm unfamiliar with, where everyone gets to, you know, have one name to exclude or something of that effect.
Kim can describe it better than I.
I'll jump in here. It's a familiar thing that happens with arbitrators often, where you develop a strike list. So you have a master list, and it's determined randomly who gets the first strike, if you will. So you would have if you had a list of 4, and if you had the applicants each have one, and the water authority has a strike, or whatever it is, each person can use a strike until there's one remaining, and it's, you know, it's a little bit like musical chairs in a way. Whoever's last one still standing takes the cake.
Well, is that agreeable to the subject agencies, the strike list?
I can't speak for Jack, but, you know, I don't really have that big a heartburn with that.
And this is Jack. Hopefully this isn't that necessary, right? So if we're both approaching this in good faith, we just want a competent water resources expert. You know, hopefully we don't get wrapped around the axle on, you know, not being able to find someone. So that's sort of my hope. And to kind of interpret, you know, what Nick was saying, I could understand him through his feedback. I think what essentially he's saying is, you know, what matters for Fallbrook is, can we meet 100% of our demands, right? So, you know, there's different dry year scenarios that we look at, 3-5 year dry year scenarios. You know, there's different mitigation measures we have to take during those scenarios. If we go through and it says, you know, Eastern can meet 108% of our demand, and then we look at it and says, well, the Water Authority can meet 109% of our demand, that doesn't matter, right? So anything over 100 isn't real helpful. It's water we don't need for anything. So I think, you know, that's what Nick's getting at. When we look at this, the key is, under these scenarios, projected future drought scenarios, how we all do water supply planning, can Eastern meet our needs under those scenarios, which are unique to both Fallbrook and Rainbow in terms of how we respond to drought conditions. So I think as long as we kind of have the right focus on what they're looking at, and we get the right person, I don't think this needs to be, you know, too complicated.
Sandy, it sounds like there is consensus on the selection process that would be done offline. And it's the way I'm kind of anticipating this would be, I send an email to the 4 subject agencies saying, here's the list of consultants I'm good with, and then you 4, or the representatives for subject agencies, you know, identify any concerns along the way, and then maybe in a wonderful scenario, you guys all just email me back and say, this is the person. Or you all email me back and say, we have no issues with any of them.
Yeah, I think a couple of things, Keen. Number one is, I don't think it's appropriate to have 3 agencies versus 1 agency making that decision. So if you want to go down that route, I think Gary and David need to be included in that group as well. Like, we get 1 strike, and that doesn't seem appropriate when the Water Authority has 24 member agencies. And, you know, I've talked repeatedly about the fact that I don't represent each individual agency, and that's how we got to having some additional representation on this committee. So that's number one. Number two, I want to say very clearly that this is not a 3 to 5 year issue in terms of water reliability. This is a long-term issue. And so while I respect what's been said so far, I think there are some gaps in terms of the analysis, which we will be going toward further, and will provide as part of our response. But I just want to be very clear that the water authority represents the entire region, and to have three agencies, one of which is not in San Diego County, make that decision on behalf of all of the county, I don't think is appropriate.
If I could just jump in here, Keen, real quick. One way to approach this, I think, and Sandy raises an issue I think we should address, is the number of strikes each side has. And so what I would suggest is that after the meeting, Keen and I can come up with a proposal that equalizes the strikes, Sandy, to address that concern, whether it's everybody on the applicant side, whoever it is, combined, they get one strike for every strike the authority gets, or whether we expand it, may be driven by how many people we have on the list. But I think we can address that, and I would suggest that Keen and I talk about that later and then circulate our proposal about that.
Holly, I would very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Gary, I see your hand is still up.
No, I'm good. I just didn't figure out how to lower it. You know me, quick to go up, but slow to come down. So I will lower my hand. I'm good to go. Thank you, though, Keith.
Okay, so do any of the other committee members have any thoughts about this issue of selecting and then tasking consultants? Seeing none, well, I'm always too quick on that. I'll learn better, Rachel. Rachel, please go ahead.
Yeah, I guess my question is just if, since no one really said any other tasks, no one really mentioned anything other than the 3 tasks that you brought up, then the consultants that you select, would they put together some kind of proposal or scope of work based on those tasks, or are they just chosen based on their kind of resume of expertise or something? I know how it would work at Sandag, I guess. I'm not sure if I know how it would work somewhere else.
So, and no, it's a good question. So to date, I have talked with consultants specifically about the 3 topics that I've shared with the committee to gauge their interest and familiarity with it. Now, they all come with reputations that I believe are to be solid. Part of the vetting, which in this process would be through all 4 subject agencies, not only to say who they like or maybe have concerns about, but from your own respective expertise, vet the qualifications. It's very possible maybe the 3 or 4 names that we provide the group, maybe none of them, for whatever the reason, not because one group has concerns, but there's a collective belief that they're not the right fit for the particular issues. And we can generate certainly more consultants. And again, our focus to date was to bring in people from the Bay Area because they were outside. Maybe we come closer if need be and find some consultants down here in Southern California. I see Sandy has her hand up. Sandy.
Just one other thought that I wanted to share on this, and in your consideration, Polly, and the options that you look at, I think this is a really critical moment to express the gravity of this situation, in that our 24 member agencies represent over 3 million people and 3 million ratepayers and voters. And that is not the same as looking at Rainbow, Fallbrook, and Eastern. And so again, I just throw that out for your consideration. I think that is part of the challenge in this, is that it is an issue that in fact affects the entire county, and they cannot be disenfranchised through this process.
David.
Thanks, Keen. In my spare time, I suppose I should say that I also represent the city of San Diego as a board member at CWA, and I think that I would be not well received back in the city if I didn't put my hand up and say that the city would certainly like to have some input. And as one of 24 or so agencies that are involved, and certainly whatever ramifications come down the road as a result of detachment, city bears a 39% share of that. So we remain very interested in the outcome and the deliberations along the way. Thank you.
Understood, and a good comment, David. Thank you. Tom.
Just to respond to Sandy and David there, for the last 14 months or so, Jack and I have been making the rounds to all the member agencies, speaking to everybody at the Water Authority Board, all the different member agencies. We've visited, I think 12 or 15 of them directly. And there is ample opportunity for those folks to weigh in here through the Lavco process by September 18th. And they could be commenting at these meetings we're having here. And so nobody's being disenfranchised here. The law prescribes who the applicants and affected agencies are, and member agencies are interested parties, certainly. But under the law, they're not affected agencies. But irrespective, we're welcome any of their input. Jack and I have reached out recently to other general managers to try to get more input. And so we're not trying to disenfranchise anybody, I'm sure, nor is Lafco. So if somebody's got something they want to bring to the table, have at it.
Jack.
Yeah, and I think, we've got 3 consultants, these large tasks associated with looking at financial impacts. I think that information is going to get out there in terms of what is our impact in leaving the water authority. That's primarily what member agencies are concerned about, is what is our financial impact of Fallbrook and Rainbow leaving the water authority versus other things that are going to impact the finances of the water authority. So I think that will come forward. And, the reality is the loss of Fallbrook is not financially devastating to the water authority. And that is what what I believe we'll see through this analysis. So I think it's great if other agencies want to get involved. And I think the process we're putting together will provide them the information, and they can decide how important is it to them, how important is it to the city of San Diego to take a stance about what happens with the Fallbrook Public Utility District.
Very good. Any other hands from the committee members? While you contemplate that, Erica, any emails that have come our way during this item?
No email comments received.
Okay, and I think I already asked Tammy. We didn't have any registered speakers for this, correct? Tammy? Have we lost Tammy?
She dropped off. She's coming back on.
Sorry about that, Tammy. I had an instinct that you were taking a break, and I wanted to call you out on YouTube. Did we have any speakers for this?
None. No
Okay.
speakers received.
Committee, I think we've gotten good direction and feedback on this item. And I think what we will do, as Holly said, we'll come up with what we think is a good approach to getting some version of this striking activity. I do like this phrase, striking activity, but that takes into account, Sandy's comments and David's comments. And, as Jack, I think, said, the goal is maybe this figures itself out through, agreement and consensus without a whole lot of teeth pulling. We shall see. So with that, I think this next item is comes back to a comment that Sandy just made, and I know that has been on some people's mind. It was on one of our commissioners' mind when they called in last meeting, and that is, and I'm going down to item 4, F as in Frank, the issue about how we engage the other 22 members of the Water Authority. And I have to put out my own premise here. My instincts is to treat the other 22 member agencies through the prism of interacting with the water authority, because the water authority, of course, is this entity that, these are my words, not Sandy's or David's or Gary's, but in my mind is the designated representative of their interests with respect to Fallbrook-Rainbow. The water authority is the mother association, and there may be a better term, but that's why to date, our interaction and our noticing at Lavco has been focused in on just the subject and affected agencies. We had at Sandy's request voluntarily started to provide notices to the other 22 member agencies, whenever we were to put something on the Lafco agenda. For example, we did that for today's meeting. But I understand that Sandy has raised a question that, how do we interact with and create some meaningful participation with the other water authority members? And so the question I have for the committee is the baseline work. For our purposes at Lavco, should we just rely on the water authority to do its own disseminating of information to its agencies and avoid trying to directly interact and have 22 general managers or boards interplay with Lavco? Or are these situations unique enough where we need to get outside of this parameter and figure out a way to bring in the other 22 member agencies? So I've shown you my cards a bit. And I am looking for just some thoughts and feedback. And out of courtesy, I'd like just to go back to Sandy on this point. And in particular, Sandy, if you have a suggestion for us on how we should or could incorporate input from the other member agencies, what would that be in your mind?
Thank you, Keen. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you sharing where you're at. Just to be clear, and you and I've had this conversation several times, I'm not designated to represent them for these purposes by boards of other agencies. And in fact, already know that several agencies have very different perspectives on this. I think we need some facts again to make a recommendation. Lafco puts the burden on the applicants. I think at a minimum, there needs to be noticing out to all of those agencies of these meetings and the Lafco meetings. And they can, as Tom said, suggest that they want to weigh in. I will tell you that the rounds of information that have been provided have been, as the applications are with Lafco, incomplete. And once all available information is available, their input will be much more meaningful in this process than a part of the story. So I think certainly they ought to be engaged, at least at a minimum, by noticing and of these meetings and the Lafco board meetings when it's discussed.
Thank you, Sandy. Any other feedback on this comment about the role of the other 22 member agencies? I'm looking for hands. Saw Sandy's got her hand. So Tom, what say you?
Well, I think that it's important to get everybody's input, but also to follow how, the Lafco processes work in regard to, who's in the room. It's hard enough with as many people we have in this committee, but to get 24 of them in there. And I guess I'll have to disagree somewhat with Sandy's characterization of the Water Authority Board. They did vote as a whole in closed session to authorize the attorneys they're using to oppose our detachment. Jack and I were obviously excluded from that vote. And so the board has acted collectively, and through a resolution they've passed, the member agencies have given their voice to this. So the function of the Water Authority Board, just like SANDAG gives voice to SANDAG and not just each member agency of SANDAG, they work collectively as a group to come up with policy objectives, and they vote on them and they push them forward and fund them. So to say that they're not involved or don't have a voice in it isn't exactly accurate.
Looking for any other input on this topic. Don't see any hands yet. I see David waving. David.
Thank you, Keene. A statement was made that by law, the various retail agencies that rely on county water authority are not affected agencies, and whatever happens down the road here with the proposed detachment by on the part of Fallbrook and Rainbow affects not just CWA, but it affects all of the retail agencies that are downstream of CWA. And also, it has an impact in outside of San Diego County as well at Eastern and Riverside. So, how is the city of San Diego or Carlsbad or Otay not an affected party in this proposed detachment?
So David and Holly or Robert can get into better details on this, but the statute is our lead in telling us who is an affected agency and who's a subject agency. So a subject agency is any entity whose jurisdictional boundary is subject to a proposed change. So in this case, we have these 4 entities whose boundaries are in play for some kind of modification: Water Authority, Rainbow, Eastern, Fallbrook. An affected agency in Lavco law is an entity who is not directly subject to the proposed actions directly, and the law defines that indirectly by saying, does your jurisdictional boundary cover the subject lands and or your sphere of influence? So in this case, Carlsbad, Encinitas, Otay, their jurisdictional boundary nor sphere of influence goes up and covers Fallbrook or Rainbow. So they're not considered an affected agency. That's the statutory response. We get that there is an impact on the 22 other member agencies of the Water Authority, but keep in mind, if we deviate too far from Lafco law, we run the risk of people saying we're abusing our discretion in what we incorporate as into our analysis, right? So the statutes give us direction as how we define affected subject agencies. We follow that. We try to address other issues like the big one right here, how to deal with Otay, Padre Dam, so on and so forth. But legally, we're not required to provide notices, and they're not considered affected agencies.
Okay, so the definition by law then is really a geographic one.
Yes, I would say a geographic and jurisdictional one.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So I see Sandy and Jack have their hands up. I assume these are new comments. So Sandy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to address something that Tom said, and I want to be very clear. The Water Authority Board has supported the full review of these applications at Lavco. They have not taken a position on this. The Water Authority authorized hiring of legal expertise in Lavco issues because we do not possess that at the Water Authority. And our board will not take a position other than what was said in the resolution. If there isn't a full and complete analysis and findings with regard to the work done at Lavco, that is only the time at which they would oppose the detachment. But I want to be very clear about that. Our board has not taken a position to oppose detachment.
Jack.
I'm a little worried now what it's going to look like if the board formally opposes detachment. But so I think the thing to keep in mind is we're not leaving the city of San Diego. We're not leaving Leeuwenhoek. We're trying to detach from the Water Authority. And this is exactly why, the Water Authority exists. If every action a member agency took, we had to get approval from every other board for every other elected entity in the county, we wouldn't get much done. So this is why all of us sit on the water authority for these types of issues. If we were to detach and there was sort of a revenue impact, then it's up to the water authority to figure out, do we do something to reduce that revenue impact? How do we adjust rates? So I think advertising these meetings to everyone is great. I think that, I don't see any problem with that. And again, like I said before, we're also more than happy to sit down. I know I am, I think Tom is too. Any member agency manager that has ideas, wants to talk about things, has concerns about something, we've made that offer, and I continue to make that offer. So I think, that avenue is open as well as we work through this process. If they feel like their concerns aren't getting addressed, then they can express those through the Lavco process.
Okay, so I'm going to check in with Tammy, although I don't see her on my screen. Tammy, you still with us? Any registered comments for this? Is Linda with us?
1 second, her connection dropped off again.
Okay. Tammy, any registered speakers for this item? We're on 4 F as in Frank.
No registered speakers.
Okay, and Erica, any email comments on this item?
No email comments.
Okay, so I think at a minimum, the feedback is the noticing, the voluntary, just for the record, the voluntary noticing to the other 22 member agencies is appropriate. And then a comment to Sandy, we would certainly be willing, if there's interest in having Robert go out to the water authority if there was a desire to see an update from Lafco staff in which your other 22 member agencies could hear directly from us and or convey questions that we can incorporate into our analysis. Maybe that's not the only, but one other way we can, start to engage the other 22 members. So an offer for you to consider.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Very good. All right. So in terms of let me make sure I'm right on my agenda. Hold on. I think the last item was just setting up for the next meeting, which goes to the idea of when our next meeting would be. I propose tentatively we come back on October 5th, 2 months essentially, because that will have allowed us to close the comment period on Robert's notice for everyone to provide comments on the proposal submittals. It will have also presumably allowed us offline to work on getting one or more consultants in the queue and starting to address their task of confirming and peer reviewing documentation already in the record from all the agencies. So October 5th would be the date in my mind. We can confirm that going forward, but I think it would be appropriate to allow the next meeting not to occur until the September 18th comment period ends. So unless there were any heartburn about that, Jack, you have your hand up still.
I do have one comment before we, or do we have are we going to do sort of a closeout, or are we done?
Yeah, no, after this, we're going to do go around and get comments from the all committee members.
Quietly.
So you think about what you'll say. Any feedback on the next meeting? Seeing none, let us, and thank you all for, I know this is a lot longer a meeting than I probably suggested it would be, so thank you. I do want to give the opportunity for any of the members to provide comments as you see fit. Jack, I know that you indicated you have a comment, so I'll go to you first.
Sure, and thank you, Keen. I just want to, really appreciate, I understand for everyone this is a bit of a contentious issue. I would just ask moving forward, I don't find this to be incredibly productive if we start attacking people professionally or personally. So there were written comments put in to the commission meeting today that sort of, talked about our agencies having issues and essentially called out Tom and I as bad general managers. And I just don't think that type of dialogue's really productive or helpful as we move forward. So I think, you know, we can all attack each other as public agencies. It just makes us all look bad. So I would just suggest, you know, especially when we start to get the individuals, that we avoid that. You know, we have disagreements on substance, which is fine, but let's stay with the substance and not try to roll down to individuals. So that's just, you know, my comment. Hopefully we don't get, you know, letters following up that, you know, continue to say either Tom and I are mismanaging our districts. I just don't think that's helpful.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Jack. I don't see any other hands in the air. Brian, go for it.
Well, this is my last opportunity during this meeting to speak. One, just thank you to your team for the presentations that I found helpful on the topics. And I'm wondering, not having a great sense myself of what the extended timeline is on this, the consultants to produce their recommendations, and ultimately for this to, I guess, come before the commission board for a decision. I'm thinking that there are sort of this list of items of substance that are important items upon which the commission is ultimately going to base its decision. And I wonder if it's possible as our advisory committee moves along to maybe, if Lafco staff is able to do this, have just a brief summary of what those issues are, and then identify if the parties that are most directly involved, Rainbow and Fallbrook and the County Water Authority, have reached agreement on those issues. And then separately, the issues for which agreement has not been reached. Because I would expect that, I know at the end of the day, just because those agencies reach agreement doesn't mean that's going to be what Lafco staff does in its recommendation. But it seems like where you're going to be seeking our input the most is on providing it, towards the items where the agencies most directly involved have not reached agreement. And so, I'm taking good notes as we go, and I'm trying to paint that picture. But if there's a way to sort of keep that neat and tidy, it might be helpful moving forward. Just my suggestion.
No, well said, Brian. And we know the three topics right now, and they may expand: water reliability, impacts on rates of the other member agencies, and then potential true-ups to address restitution one way or the other. So we can start focusing the agenda on those topics as we go along. Future agendas will get into the other statutory factors that Robert is responsible for helping us make sense of. But I hear you, and we'll start narrowing our focus for the committee's benefit. Thank you, sir. Tom.
Just a quick final type comments. I guess with regard to not meeting until October, and then we're not making a decision on consultants till after that date, or can we try to get there before that date? Because then we're going to be in November, December before they get started. This thing's going to be in spring of next year before we even get any information together. So I'd like to see if we can keep it on track, and that's what we've expressed.
My thought, Tom, on the consultants is that we will work on the mechanism of selection offline and get the consultants going so that they have something to say to you come October 5th.
Awesome. Excellent. So on the other thing, I just wanted to thank everybody for their time today, especially the 3 victims who get dragged into this thing who aren't a direct party to it. I appreciate you guys sitting through these multi-hour meetings and giving us your time and expertise.
Very good. Seeing no other hands in the air, I just want to go back. Oh, excuse me, Gary, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
No, it's okay. I thought that was just part of the roundtable. So the one thing for me is the good news is absolutely we don't have to worry about the 22 other member agencies because Otay and San Diego City are here. So we're down to 20 other agencies. So we reduced that by 2. So that's a step forward, even if it's a baby step. The part in regards to mismanagement of agencies and stuff that was in the letter this morning, that came directly from the 2014 Lavco report that talked about why the agencies were in a little bit of trouble. So I think it's important that while we'll make sure that they don't get individual attacks, I think some information that is historic or data driven or has been brought forth that the committee needs to look at as a whole absolutely needs to be brought forward. But we'll work on making sure that it's not personal attacks and it's more general of truly fact driven basis.
Thank you, Gary. And Sandy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted a clarification, Keen, on what are you saying the experts will do in October?
Well, we'll have defined who they are and what they're working on. That will be the primary report back. That is the goal, that we'll have selected consultants that they'll start peer reviewing the existing documentation that is on record as of after that September 18th deadline for all comments to be received.
Okay, so you're assuming that we'll have a process that can get to that by a date prior to the 18th, so that once the comments are submitted, they can review all materials.
I assume so, yes. And it's a moving target. You know, if we can't make that, if for whatever reason we need to go out to the consultant well to find some better fits, well, then that will push back the consultant's report back to the committee.
So is this saying the committee doesn't get any input in regard to how that scope of work is set up? They're just going to be set to go?
Well, I think that was part of the discussion right now or earlier, was to focus the initial work on the consultants on reviewing what the existing documentation is or will be as of September 18th and respond to that. And, you know, there's two avenues, whether they could come back and say, you know, based on these assumptions, these are fair assessments, or based on, you know, a professional opinion, this needs more work for these reasons. I think October 5th is the opportunity to start hearing from a consultant, assuming one is in place, and getting committee feedback on their direction. But we have to give, I think, the consultant some room to work on or to work with as well. It's a moving target, but I think we can get to October 5th, at least with the report back.
Okay, so it just seems like there should be some agreement on the scope of work. You're talking about reliability, rates, financing, the environmental, all that consulting work going forward.
Not the environmental. Again, my take is right now that is not a topic that we need to go to the consultant well on. It is the topics of water reliability, impacts on water rates, and potential true-ups. I used to use the phrase exit fees, but I appreciate that term was not liked by all. So true-ups in the sense of, you know, are there potential financial restitutions that need to be addressed one way or the other because of the impacts on water rates? Those are the three specific topics I brought to the committee, and it appeared that the committee was agreeable on in tasking the consultants. If I misheard,
yeah, I think
possible, maybe not probable, but
I think it would be important maybe to have a quick offline discussion with regard to the consultant scope. I mean, you're looking at 17 days from the date that closes, that there's going to be some opinion, and the topics are not completely scoped out.
Well, let me jump in, Sandy. I'm not presupposing the consultant in 2 weeks is going to have an opinion as to whether it's accurate or not. I'm presupposing that they can come and report on where they are in their process.
Yeah, I think I think we have a little bit of a disconnect, and you know, why wouldn't it also be opportune to have the possible pool of consultants come to the committee as well?
I feel like we may be backtracking a bit. To be clear, the feedback that I heard from the committee was for me and Holly to work on a system that would allow the subject agencies with some fair representation to have some input on the selection of those consultants. Lafco staff would identify them. Presumably, the subject agencies would come to an agreement on one or more of those consultants, and we'd go forward. It was not my understanding that the full committee would vet and select those consultants for us. But I want to be fair to the committee. If I misheard the earlier discussion, that's possible. Those who are still online, you know, this is an opportunity to help with my processing. I see I've got two hands up. Yes, Sandy.
Keen, just 2 points. I agree with you on the consultant selection, assuming that the process that's arrived at we can agree to, that you and Holly come up with, but we did not discuss the scope at all today, and I think that needs to be part of the committee process. To just take a look at what's been submitted to date and say we're good, I don't know if that's going to really get the job done, and that needs to be a committee discussion.
Let's keep going on this. Jack and Nick, or Nick and Jack. I think Nick, your hand was up first, and then Jack.
Nick, my audio has corrected itself. Is it better than last spoke? I apologize. Next committee meeting, I need to call in on the phone. I don't know what happened here. With that, I can continue.
Yeah, a little rough. So if you write an email quickly to Erica, I think we might still have time to take a look at it. But Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's today is August 3rd. So we're talking about meeting, 2 months from now, just to kind of go over a preliminary scope of consultants. And I just have a hard time figuring out how this seems too fast. I mean, it seems like we're moving about as glacially slow as possible on this process. So, and we should be able to do more than one thing at a time. So if there's a big concern from the Water Authority about additional stuff the consultants specifically want to look at to get them ahead of time of their September submittal, it seems like they could do that, so that, and we talked about this for the last kind of 2 hours on the process. It just doesn't seem, to get to that point in October of just having a consultant and some idea of what they might do is aggressive by any means. Otherwise, I think we're just sort of standing in place.
Well, how about this? Sandy premised her comments, I think, appropriately on, well, what if the offline doesn't reach a consensus? Well, why don't we go down the premise that the offline will develop a premise, and we can come back then on October 5th and get a report back from the consultant or consultants on their beginning work. If there's not consensus, well then I hit pause and I come back to you on October 5th and say, we didn't reach consensus offline. We're going to make some sausage here on YouTube and figure out how to do it that way. Maybe that's a good way. And Sandy, as you contemplate that, David has his hand up.
Thank you, Keith. We did not talk about the scope of work for any of the consultants. How would you like to go about that process, which is really fundamental to the consultant's task?
Well, I guess I'm keeping it relatively straight down the middle. The consultant ultimately is going to work for Lafco staff. we have identified these three issues: water reliability, rate impacts, and possible true-ups on financial restitution that could be effectuated in conditions. That's their scope of work to look at. We're tasking them initially just to look at the existing documentation in the record that all of the agencies can provide through September 18th. That's their initial scope of work in my estimation.
So there's no, excuse me, there's no empirical work on their part?
Well, I think implicitly there is going to be quantification in getting us to the point of, I've read all these documents, here's and here they are, here's my thoughts on them. I guess I'm presuming that having the peer review orientation is in it of itself the empirical ingredient. They're attesting that they've read these documents, here's their thoughts. They're accurate but with some qualification, or they're wildly, off base. I mean, I assume three of those variations would be the outcome of a peer review.
So they would be reviewing all the documentation that comes in as of September 18th?
They'd be reviewing all documentation relevant to the three topics that I identified: water reliability, impacts on rates, and potential true-ups on financial restitution.
Thank you.
So
this is Gary. Just one other question, if I may. The other thing is the other impacts specific to the county in regards to loss of preferential rights, other impacts beyond financial voting rights, those kind of things. Does that come in under miscellaneous, or where do we address?
Well, I think those are things that Robert and staff can address on our own.
Correct.
Again, we're looking for technical expertise on things that are beyond our normal.
Nope, I like it. I just wanted to make sure that those didn't get lost by the committee as a whole. But the fact that we don't need a consultant to look at those, I agree.
Got it. Tom, your hand is still up.
I just put it up. I just wanted to, hopefully we can wrap this up, and I hope everybody doesn't get too wrapped around the axle on what exactly the scope is. The way I see this is that this consultant works for Lafco. We as a committee and us as an applicant are giving Lafco some of our general thoughts on what we think might be appropriate, but the real decision maker on what the scope is and what the consultant does rests in the hands of Lafco, and I support that.
I don't see any new hands up. Sandy, are you at least okay with the idea that let's give the offline opportunity to find consensus on who the consultant is, and the tasking, as I outlined, that here are the three topics, review the existing documentation that we provide you that relates to this, and tell us what you think. And October 5th would just simply be them reporting back as to where they are in the process. I doubt they would have any substantive conclusions to offer up at that early stage. So that's the ideal scenario. If we can't find consensus on the selection of the consultant, or the pool of consultants is not up to expectations, well, then we come back on October 5th and we try again with the committee and a new approach.
Yeah, I would just say that I don't think accurate is a scope of work for a consultant. I'm very concerned how that task is going forward. I think we get the offline process to agree to the consultant, and then we can discuss the scope of work.
Fair enough. And keep in mind, Lafco is a quasi legislative body. We do not make findings, we make determinations. So I appreciate that is different from how some other agencies represented on the committee have to go about their analysis. But at the end of the day, I am comfortable tasking the consultant to do a peer review first, to tell us if this meets standard practices, if there are areas that need to be improved, or if there are substantial areas that need to be improved. And I'm also comfortable in coming back to the committee and getting your peer review, whether or not Lafco staff needs to ask more of their consultants. You will be given that opportunity. Okay, so Jack.
Yeah, just one last thing, and then I'll promise I'll stop talking. But I'm a little worried that now we're having some offline discussion. What we've laid out seems to me to be pretty basic. Is the fact that we're going to try to get a consultant that people can agree to, and then they're going to review the background material that comes in from both us and the Water Authority. And the Water Authority still has over a month to finalize the information they want to provide based on that application. I can't think of a single consultant contract that the first thing they don't do is review the background material. So I'm just struggling to figure out why this is. If we can't agree to this, it's hard for me to see how we're going to agree to issues when we really have to start to deal with stuff that they're going to come back in October, 2 months from now, and just say, I've looked at the background material. Here's how I see it. Here's the other stuff I feel we have to look at. And there's still time at that point for our input. It seems pretty straightforward to me, but maybe I'm missing something.
I don't see any other hands. So I think we will conclude this item with one last opportunity for the public to weigh in. Tammy, are there any new registered speakers for public comment point 2?
No registered speakers.
Erica, any general public comments received for public comment point 2?
No comments received.
Okay. Committee members, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much for your time. I think it is constructive. It may not always feel like we're making progress, but I assure you we are. We're further along than we were a month ago. We will work a little bit offline with the subject agencies, and hopefully we can get some good consensus. And if not, well, then we will talk about it on October 5th. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.